The crowd rose as the ex-Navy SEAL kissed his bride, never seeing the woman at the back of the aisle, the one he once broke, the one carrying the truth that would burn his world before the champagne went flat. He'd fought wars to protect his country, but the war that would end him began the moment Tashia Gamble said, "Congratulations, Commander."
Hello, if you're ready to hear the whole story, click subscribe and tap the notification bell. Type in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as touching as this one, or maybe even crazier. And you don't want to miss it. Now let's begin.
The hum of conversation filled Riverside Manor, that kind of noise born from money and reputation. Every corner gleamed, crystal glassware, lemon pressed within an inch of perfection, and floral arrangements so symmetrical they looked engineered. But it wasn't beauty that made the room pulse. It was anticipation. At the front of the aisle, Fred Norsgard stood beneath an arch of white orchids, jaw locked, shoulders squared, the picture of controlled strength. He didn't belong in a place like this. Too many cameras, too much softness. The man still moved like he was clearing rooms, not marrying into one of Vermont's oldest families. His fiancée, Cynthia McIntyre, was a vision of deliberate perfection. Every curl, every diamond was placed for display. A message to the crowd, she'd landed the town's most decorated veteran. Her mother, April, sat proudly in the front row, her posture stiff with approval and quiet triumph. Fred's friend, Winston Moreno, stood off to the side, near the groomsmen, watching him with the faintest hint of concern. He'd known Fred in Afghanistan, had seen that same distant stare before the breaching charge blew. The man could face gunfire without blinking, but commitment? That still looked like an ambush. As the officiant cleared his throat, Fred's gaze swept the crowd, scanning faces the way soldiers do when they don't trust peace. Every instinct told him this calm wouldn't last. Across town, Tashia Gamble was buttoning the back of her dress in the mirror of her modest apartment. No soft music, no luxury, just the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the faint giggle of children in the next room. "Mom, are we late?" little Jonas asked, trying to zip his tiny vest by himself. His twin sisters, May and Kara, sat cross-legged on the couch, munching crackers shaped like stars. Tashia smiled faintly. "Not yet. Big events run on other people's time." The mirror reflected a woman who'd survived storms without lightning. Stronger now, though the world had once buried her. Once she'd stood in front of a different mirror, wearing a different dress, believing in promises made by a man who wore medals instead of empathy. Fred Norsgard. When he'd left her, she thought the silence would kill her. Then came the doctor's call. The impossible heartbeat, 3 of them, and silence turned into purpose. 6 years later, she wasn't the same woman, not the one who begged him to stay, not the one who broke quietly. Today, she was walking into his story not for revenge, but for truth. Lorena Jacobs, the wedding planner, had called her at dawn. "I'm desperate, Tashia. The decorator quit. I know you used to freelance. I'll pay double if you can come." Tashia Grimos said no, but something deep inside, the part that still trembled when she heard his name, whispered, "Go." If you had the chance to face the person who wronged you, knowing you finally held the power they once took, would you walk away or walk in? Viewers, drop your answer in the comments.
For a heartbeat, no one breathed. The hall, bright, expensive, meticulously curated, hung in stunned silence. The organist's fingers froze on the keys. The hum of the air conditioner was suddenly too loud. Every guest in Riverside Manor stared at the woman who had just walked in carrying 3 small bouquets and 3 children with the same eyes as the groom. Fred Norsgard felt the air leave his lungs in a slow, choking rush. His brain tried to impose order, identify, assess, neutralize. But there was nothing to assess, only truth, naked and merciless, staring back at him in triplicate. "Tashia," he whispered, barely audible. Cynthia McIntyre's face hardened, the elegant poise draining from her like spilled wine. "Who is she?" she demanded, her whisper slicing through the silence. "Fred, who is she?" Fred's lips moved, but no words came. April McIntyre rose from her seat, scandal glowing behind her eyes. "Is this some kind of joke?" she barked toward the staff. "Loretta, handle this. Someone remove that woman immediately." Loretta Jacobs, the wedding planner, froze mid-step, horror dawning as she finally recognized the intruder. "Tashia, oh dear Lord." Tashia didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice or move dramatically. Her stillness was its own kind of violence. "No joke, Mrs. McIntyre. I'm here because he forgot something. Or rather, 3 someones." A murmur rippled through the guests. Someone gasped audibly. A bridesmaid dropped her bouquet. Cameras clicked, smartphones lifted discreetly. Fred felt the world tilt beneath him. 6 years of silence collapsed into seconds. He stepped forward, his voice rough. "Tashia, this isn't the place." "Maybe it's the only place," she said, meeting his eyes with quiet steadiness. "You told me once that truth is what sets soldiers apart from cowards. I believed that once." Cynthia turned on him, disbelief cracking into rage. "Fred, what is she talking about?" He opened his mouth, but Tashia spoke first. "I didn't come here to humiliate you, Fred. I came here because I spent years hiding from the truth you left me with. These children deserve better than the lie you're standing in." A hush fell again. Even Winston Moreno, who had seen men die and secrets buried in blood, could feel the weight of what was unfolding. He stepped forward slightly, his jaw tight. "Fred," he murmured, warning, compassion, disbelief tangled in his tone. Fred's voice broke. "You can't just show up here, Tashia. This is my—" "Your wedding?" "Yes, a celebration built on pretending you're someone else." Her voice didn't shake, but her hands did. She steadied them by resting one on May's shoulder. The little girl looked up at her mother, confused but calm. Sensing this wasn't anger, it was something deeper. "You walked away," she said, each word precise, controlled. "You said I'd never be enough because I couldn't give you a family. And I believed that. For months, I believed that. Until the doctor called, until I heard 3 heartbeats." The guests stared, horrified, enthralled, unable to look away. Fred's throat constricted. "You should have told me." "I did," she said quietly. "I sent a letter to your base in Pensacola. I called. I even reached out to Jorge He, your commanding officer. You never answered. You didn't want to hear from me." Fred turned to Winston. "Did you—" Winston shook his head. "I never got that message, brother. But I remember you burning a box of mail that year. You said the past didn't matter." Something in Fred's expression cracked. The carefully built facade of command, control, confidence, it all fractured into raw, human panic. Cynthia's face was white as porcelain. "You knew?" she whispered. "You knew and you said nothing?" He looked at her helplessly. "I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't." April's voice sliced in. "This is obscene. You—" Tashia turned toward her. "No, Mrs. McIntyre. What's obscene is pretending a man's medals erase the pain he caused." For a long second, even April had no words. Fred's pulse thundered in his ears. He looked at the children again. Jonas watching curiously, May clutching her mother's hand, Kara tilting her head with that same small frown he used to have when he didn't understand something. His knees felt weak. He whispered, mostly to himself, "They look like me." Tasha's reply was quiet, almost merciful. "They are you." Loretta moved closer, voice trembling. "Tashia, what do you want to do?" Tashia exhaled, glancing around the hall. "Nothing. I've said what needed saying." She looked back at Fred. "You don't have to say anything. This isn't for you. It's for them." Her gaze flicked toward the children again. "They'll never wonder who their father is. I wanted them to see the man behind the uniform. That's all." Fred took a half-step forward, but Winston's arm stopped him. "Don't," he murmured. "Not now. Let her go." Tashia turned, guiding the triplets toward the door. The crowd parted instinctively, silence following her like a shadow. But just before stepping outside, she paused and looked over her shoulder one last time. "Congratulations, Commander. Looks like you finally got the life you wanted." Her tone wasn't bitter. It was final. Fred stood frozen as the doors shut behind her, slow, deliberate, echoing, like the lid of a coffin.
The applause never resumed. Minutes after Tashia left, the hall was still frozen in disbelief. Guests murmured behind their hands. Camera flashes blinked like nervous twitches. It wasn't a wedding anymore. It was wreckage. At the altar, Fred Norsgard stood motionless, his mind a tangle of panic and denial. His breathing was shallow, heart hammering like it had in combat. Only this time, there was no gunfire, no enemy to shoot, just the echo of his own silence. "Fred?" Cynthia hissed, voice trembling with restrained fury. "Say something, right now." He turned to her, but words refused to form. He could feel every eye on him. Cynthia's, April's, the crowd's, Winston's. Every muscle screamed to regain control, to command the situation the way he'd been trained to. "I didn't know," he said at last. "I swear to you, I didn't." April's scoff cut through the air. "And yet she walked in with 3 identical copies of your face. Either you're lying or you're a fool." Cynthia's voice broke. "You humiliated me on my wedding day." Fred's jaw clenched. "You think I wanted this?" Her eyes burned with tears. "No, you just created it." The crowd shifted, sensing the scene was no longer theirs to witness. Loretta Jacobs quietly began ushering guests out, whispering apologies. The soft shuffle of heels and murmurs filled the silence as the room emptied. Within minutes, only a handful remained. Fred, Cynthia, April, Winston, the officiant standing awkwardly near the floral arch like a man guarding the ruins of a promise. Fred turned to Winston, his voice hoarse. "She can't just walk in here and—" "She didn't make this mess," Winston said quietly. "You did." Fred's glare cut like a knife. "Don't start." "I'm not starting anything. I was there, remember? I saw what she meant to you. You were ready to build a life until your pride got in the way." Fred's shoulders stiffened. It wasn't pride, it was reality. Winston raised an eyebrow. Reality or fear? Flashback, 6 years earlier. Rain pounded against the motel window outside Pensacola. Fred sat on the edge of the bed, hands clenched. He'd come home from deployment to find the world too quiet. Tashia stood across from him, pale, holding a medical report. "I can't have children, Fred. The doctors confirmed it." He stared at her, this woman who had stood by him through every nightmare, who had whispered him back from the edge when he woke up shaking. His love for her was real, too real, but the word children hit something deep, raw, primitive. He thought of his father, angry, absent, cruel, and the promise he'd made to himself, to do better, to build something clean, permanent. And in that moment, something ugly twisted in him, fear masquerading as logic. "You should have told me before," he'd said, cold. Tashia's eyes filled with tears. "I just found out. You think I wanted this? He'd stood, retreating into himself. You knew what I wanted, a family. I can't. This isn't. Please. He'd walked out. Never looked back. He'd told himself it was the right thing, ending it cleanly. Soldiers couldn't build homes on broken ground. He never saw the letter, never knew she'd spent months searching for him, never knew 3 lives began the night he disappeared. Back in the present, Winston's voice cut through Fred's thoughts. You ran because she couldn't give you what you thought you needed. Turns out she gave it to you anyway, and you weren't man enough to face it. Fred slammed a fist into the altar railing. The sound echoed like a gunshot. You think I don't hate myself right now? Winston's gaze softened. Hating yourself isn't the same as changing. Cynthia stepped forward, her face pale but steady. You're not the man I thought you were. I didn't lie, Fred said, desperation creeping into his tone. I didn't know. But you believed you were owed something. You walked away from a woman who loved you because she didn't fit your plan. What happens when I don't? Fred flinched. She turned away. April followed her, whispering furiously about lawyers and public image. Their heels clicked down the hallway, fading into silence. Only Winston remained. He stepped closer, his voice low. You need to talk to her. Not for you, for them. Those kids didn't ask for this. Fred shook his head. She doesn't want anything from me. Maybe not, but you owe her the truth, and yourself the reality check. Fred stared at the ground. For the first time since the ceremony began, he looked small. Not like a commander or a soldier, but a man realizing his armor was just guilt, polished to a shine. He whispered, She said she came for truth, not revenge. Then give it to her, Winston said. Across town, Tashia sat on a bench near the lake, the triplets playing with fallen leaves. Her phone buzzed. Loretta's message appeared. Are you okay? She typed back, I'm fine. Just needed him to see. Her hands trembled slightly. She hit send. She wasn't fine, but she was free. Kara climbed onto her lap. Mom, are you mad at that man? She kissed her forehead. No, baby. Sometimes people hurt others because they're afraid, and sometimes the only way to stop hurting is to tell the truth. Jonas looked up, thoughtful. Is he our dad? Yes. Is he coming? She smiled faintly. No, sweetheart, not this time. The sunset shimmered across the lake, soft gold fading into steel. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was peace. Do you believe facing the truth is worth it, even when it destroys your peace? Or is silence the stronger kind of victory? Drop your thoughts below.
2 days later, the story had already spread through every corner of Burlington. Ex-Navy SEAL's secret triplets crash high society wedding. It was the kind of headline that fed morning shows and gossip podcasts. The McIntyres had gone underground. Cynthia at her family's lake house, April demanding damages and reputation repairs. Fred hadn't left his apartment. The medals, the folded flags, the framed commendation letters, they all felt like props from someone else's life. The uniform he'd once worn with pride now hung like a ghost in the closet. When the door buzzed, he almost didn't answer, but the voice that followed made him freeze. Norsgard, open up. It's Lee. Commander Jorge Lee, his old CO, now stationed as a civilian advisor with the Department of Defense. Fred buzzed him in. The man looked older, gray in the beard, but still sharp. You look like hell. Fred gave a humorless smirk. I've had better weekends. Lee stepped inside, scanning the room. You've made the news, not for the right reasons. I figured. I wouldn't care except your name's still attached to an ongoing Navy outreach contract. You're due to speak at a veterans fundraiser tomorrow night. I'm not showing up to anything, Fred muttered. You are, because the contract's under my supervision, and because the woman organizing half the event is the same one you embarrassed. Fred blinked. Tasha? Yeah, apparently she freelances with the PR team handling logistics. She didn't know you were on the roster until this morning. Fred sat back, the irony stinging. You think she'll even let me in the building? He shrugged. Doesn't matter. She doesn't have to like you. She just has to see you do the right thing for once. The next evening, the Burlington Veterans Hall buzzed with uniformed officers, reporters, and corporate sponsors. Banners hung with slogans about sacrifice and honor. Fred stood at the side entrance, staring at the stage he'd once been proud to stand on. Then he saw her. Tasha was at the registration table, headset on, clipboard in hand, composed, efficient, untouchable. She looked every bit the professional he had underestimated. The only giveaway of her tension was the faint tightness around her eyes when she spotted him. She didn't approach, didn't acknowledge him beyond a curt nod. It was worse than anger. It was dismissal. Winston appeared beside Fred, sleeves rolled up. Didn't think you'd show. Lee made it sound like a court order. Good. Maybe accountability looks better on you than guilt. When Fred finally took the stage, the room went quiet. He cleared his throat, glanced once toward the back, where Tasha stood with her arms folded, and began. I've spent half my life learning how to lead men into battle. But no one teaches you how to lead yourself out of the messes you make after the uniform comes off. A ripple moved through the crowd. The speech wasn't scripted. He continued, voice raw. Courage isn't about facing bullets. It's about facing truth. Sometimes the enemy is your own reflection, and if you run long enough, one day it finds you in a place you thought was safe. He didn't mention her name. He didn't have to. When he stepped down, the applause was polite, but not warm. It wasn't redemption. It was acknowledgement. After the event, Fred found her outside near the parking lot, loading boxes into a van. The air was sharp, the first signs of Vermont winter creeping in. Tasha, he said softly. She didn't look up. You're blocking the light, Fred. He stepped aside, but didn't leave. I didn't know about them. About the kids. I know you didn't. That's what makes it worse. You didn't know because you didn't stay long enough to find out. Fred's breath caught. I thought I was protecting both of us. I didn't want you resenting me. She almost laughed. You don't get to rewrite that as mercy. There was silence. The streetlight above them flickered. Do they know? He asked quietly. Yes, they know their father's name. They don't know the story, and I'd like to keep it that way. I'd like to see them. No, her tone was firm, calm, final. You don't get to walk into their lives for closure. They're not a lesson for you to learn from. He nodded slowly, accepting the blow. I understand. Tasha's expression softened, barely. You don't have to. Just don't make them pay for what you ran from. He wanted to tell her everything. The nights he couldn't sleep, the guilt that gnawed at him, the years of service that had stripped him of gentleness. But none of it mattered now. Are you happy? He asked instead. She hesitated. "I'm at peace. That's better than happy." When Fred turned to leave, Commander Lee was waiting by the car. "How'd it go?" She was right. About everything. Lee gave a small nod. "Then you're finally starting to sound like a man instead of a soldier." Fred looked back one last time. Tasha was helping the venue staff pack up, laughter faintly audible as her kids ran to her from the side entrance. Jonas, May, and Kara. They hugged her legs, tugging at her jacket. Pure joy and motion. She didn't see Fred watching, and maybe that was for the West. Some battles weren't meant to be won, just ended. He exhaled slowly, the breath turning to mist in the cold. "She's done with me," he murmured. Lee clapped him on the shoulder. "No, son, she just stopped bleeding." Is peace something you earn, or something you take back once you've stopped waiting for apologies? What do you think as you watch this story? The town moved on quickly, the way people do when a scandal stops feeding them. A week later, the flowers from the McIntyre-Norsgard wedding were gone, the hall scrubbed of gossip and glitter. But what remained couldn't be cleaned away, not from the people who'd lived through it. Tashia Gamble stood behind the counter of the small art co-op she'd helped found 2 years ago, the Drift Studio, a modest place tucked between a bookstore and a cafe downtown Burlington. The walls were lined with local work, paintings, ceramics, children's pieces done in marker and imagination. It was her safe space, and today she was preparing for the Community Veterans Exhibit, a showcase honoring local service members through art therapy projects, a program she herself had proposed. Irony wasn't lost on her. The same discipline that had once destroyed her family now funded her healing. She leaned over a clay handprint set, tiny fingers, each marked with a child's name. Jonas, May, Kara. Their laughter echoed in the back room as they worked with paint and mess. That sound had become her heartbeat. "You sure you don't want me to run interference if he shows?" Loretta Jacobs asked, her voice floating from the door. Tashia didn't look up. "He won't come." "Fred's not the type to back down from consequences, though." "No," Tashia said quietly. "He's the type to finally feel them." At that same hour, Fred Norsgard sat before a military ethics board via Zoom, flanked by Commander George Lee and a government liaison. The backdrop of his medals behind him looked almost mocking now. "We're not revoking commendations, but the outreach contract and public speaking engagements are being terminated. There will be a formal statement about the incident. You'll issue one too." Fred nodded. "I understand." "And Fred," Lee added, voice lower, "the best way to serve your country now is by shutting up and doing something good that doesn't involve applause." It stung, but it was right. When the call ended, Fred stayed still for a long time. His phone vibrated once. Winston Moreno. "Man, you alive?" "Barely." "You could move away, you know, start over." Fred looked out his window toward the frozen river, light glinting across the surface like fractured glass. "Starting over isn't the same as doing better." He ended the call and reached for the envelope sitting on his desk, a donation form he'd drafted the night before. The recipient line read, "The Drift Studio, Community Veterans Art Program." He signed it quietly. No note, no signature flourish, no attempt to fix what couldn't be fixed. Just contribution, anonymous. The exhibit day arrived. The co-op buzzed with families, vets, and local press. Loretta handled the media questions while Tasha guided kids through their displays. Her triplets beamed with the pride of children who didn't fully understand pain but knew joy when it surrounded them. April McIntyre entered the studio around noon, polished, severe, curiosity in her eyes. She moved through the gallery slowly, examining pieces until she reached Tashia. "You're the woman from the wedding," April said, her tone brittle. Tashia's hand stilled over a stack of brochures. "Yes, ma'am." April's gaze swept the art. "So you've turned all that chaos into this." "It wasn't chaos, Mrs. McIntyre. It was truth." April's jaw tightened. "You ruined a family." Tashia met her gaze evenly. "No, I stopped a lie." The older woman faltered for the first time. There was no malice in Tashia's tone, just calm certainty.
April looked around again at the happy noise, the light flooding through the windows, the children's laughter, and quietly left without another word. That evening, as the crowd thinned, Loretta returned from the front desk holding an envelope. "Tash, this came for you." Tashia took it frowning. Inside was a simple note in block handwriting. "For the hands that shape peace, from wreckage. FN." Beneath it was a check, generous enough to fund another full year of classes. Tashia folded the note once and tucked it into her pocket without a word. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. May came running up a moment later, smudged with green paint. "Mom, look, my handprint looks like a flower." "It's beautiful," Tashia said, crouching beside her. "You made it bloom." Meanwhile, across town, Fred stood at the pier near the Veterans Memorial. He carried no medals tonight, just an old Polaroid, yellowed at the edges. The photo showed him and Tashia before deployment, younger, naive, holding hands outside her college dorm. He let the wind take it. The picture lifted once, twirled, and vanished over the dark water. You don't get forgiveness by asking for it. You earn it by disappearing from where you broke things. He turned and walked away from the docks, shoulders squared not as a soldier, but as a man finally ready to stop running. Later that week, the Drift Studio's social media page went viral for an unexpected reason. A local reporter had snapped a photo during the exhibit. Tashia, kneeling beside her children, paint-smeared hands clasped together, light streaming in from the window. The caption read, "Healing doesn't mean forgetting who hurt you. It means remembering who you became after." Fred saw the post. He didn't like it or comment. He just saved it quietly, a digital echo of peace he'd never claim, but would always remember. That night, as the studio lights dimmed, Tashia sat in the doorway, listening to the distant hum of the city. For the first time in years, her hands weren't trembling. She looked at the tiny clay handprints drying on the table, each one fragile, imperfect, and whole. She whispered, "We made it," and meant it. Outside, the first snow began to fall. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just quiet and real, like the ending she had earned.
A month had passed since the exhibit, but traces of it still lingered through the Drift Studio, brushes drying in jars, half-finished murals from kids' sessions, and the hum of something steady, alive. The chaos of the wedding had faded into rumor. What remained was what Tashia built with her own two hands. On a bright Saturday morning, sunlight spilled through the wide windows as Jonas, May, and Kara painted on paper spread across the floor. Their laughter was the kind that erased noise. "Mom, look!" May shouted, holding up a blotchy picture of a lighthouse. "It's us!" Tashia smiled. "You see a lighthouse?" "Yeah, you said a lighthouse shows the way home, right?" "Right," she said softly, brushing paint off May's cheek. "That's exactly what it does." She stepped back and took in the sight. 3 small bodies, paint-splattered, free, unbothered by anything outside this room. They were her entire reason for rebuilding. The door opened, the bell chiming. Winston Moreno stepped inside, holding 2 paper cups of coffee and a small paper bag. "I come bearing caffeine and chaos," he said. "You're late," Tashia teased. "I was picking up muffins. You think peace just happens without carbs?" The kids ran up to greet him. Winston was their favorite visitor. Gentle, endlessly patient, a man who'd seen enough pain to recognize healing when he saw it. He handed Kara a chocolate chip muffin. "Loretta's coming by in a bit," he lowered his voice. "She's working on some PR angle for next month's city event. Thought you might want in." Tashia shook her head lightly. "I don't know if I'm ready to be the face of anything." "You don't have to be," Winston said. "Just be visible. You turned something awful into something that helps people. That's worth showing." She looked at him for a long moment. "You ever wonder if people only remember us for our worst day?" Winston sipped his coffee, thinking, "Sure, but then you keep living. And one day your best day comes along and suddenly that's what they remember." Later that afternoon, Loretta Jacobs arrived, clipboard in hand, red scarf tied like armor. "This place looks incredible," she said, scanning the colorful walls. "It's got soul. Chaos with intent.
Tashia replied with a grin. She turned serious. Listen, I wanted to tell you, after everything that happened, people are talking about you. But it's good talk. Parents, veterans, even the local papers. They're saying what you did was brave. Tashia hesitated. I didn't do it to be brave. I just stopped hiding. Same thing, Loretta said. The kids called from across the room. Kara was painting Winston's sleeve by mistake. Winston lifted his arm mock dramatic. This is fine. I always wanted to be part of modern art. Laughter filled the studio. For the first time, it didn't sound like something borrowed. It sounded earned. When the sun dipped low, they packed up the brushes. Loretta stayed to help, humming under her breath. Have you heard from him? She asked gently. Tashia paused. She didn't need to ask who. No, and I don't think I will. Would you want to? She thought for a moment, then shook her head. I used to think closure meant confrontation, but now I think it's just stillness, knowing I can look at what happened and not flinch anymore. Loretta smiled, nodding. That's real power, honey, the quiet kind. When Loretta left, Winston lingered behind, gathering the kids' drawings into neat piles. You've built something good here, he said. I had to. There was nothing left to go back to. He nodded. Maybe not, but you didn't rebuild alone. She met his eyes, the kind of look that passed between two people who understood pain, not romance, just mutual recognition. Thank you, Winston. He smiled faintly. Don't thank me, just keep doing this. Keep showing them what strength looks like. That night, after the kids fell asleep, Tashia sat by the window with a mug of tea. Snow dusted the streetlights outside, quiet and slow. On the windowsill sat the folded note Fred had sent weeks earlier. She hadn't thrown it away. She picked it up, turned it over once, and then set it back down. She didn't need an ending from him. She already had one. From the other room came the sound of tiny feet. Jonas padded in, blanket trailing. Can't sleep? She whispered. He shook his head. Can I sit with you? Of course. He climbed onto her lap, small and warm, eyes heavy. Mom? Yeah, baby. When I grow up, I want to be brave like you. Her breath caught. She kissed the top of his head. You already are. He drifted off within minutes, his head resting against your chest. Outside, the snow fell heavier, each flake silent, patient. For the first time in years, she didn't feel haunted by what she'd lost, only grateful for what she'd built. Have you ever found peace in something you thought was broken forever?
The snow had melted into soft spring rain, and the drift studio thrived. Weekends were booked solid, parents dropping off kids, veterans volunteering, laughter spilling into the street. What began as a shelter had become a movement. Tashia rarely thought about Fred anymore. When she did, it was like touching an old scar. No pain, just memory. But scars had a way of itching when you least expected. It started with a letter. A thin white envelope slipped under the studio door one morning, addressed only with her name, no sender. The handwriting was neat, familiar. She stared at it for a long minute before opening it. Inside, a short message. Tasha, you don't owe me forgiveness, but I owe you truth. Meet me at Fairchild Pier at 6 p.m. Friday. Alone. Fred. Her hands trembled, but only slightly. The world didn't tilt this time. She folded the note, slid it into her pocket, and stood very still. Friday arrived gray and restless. The water near Fairchild Pier moved like brushed steel under the sky. She almost didn't come, but curiosity wasn't weakness. It was a final test of what she had become. Fred Norsgard stood near the railing, hair shorter now, the sharp edge of his posture dulled. He turned when he saw her, something unreadable in his expression. You came, he said quietly. Apparently, she replied. Make it quick. He hesitated, exhaling. I've replayed that day 1,000 times. I told myself I was justified, that you'd given up on us, that I needed to move on. But what I did, mocking you like that, it wasn't strength.
It was cowardice. The wind picked up, carrying gull cries over the waves. She stayed silent. Fred continued. After the wedding fell apart, Cynthia left. The whole thing burned down faster than it started. And I deserve that. But I needed you to know I'm not hiding behind medals anymore. I was broken too. Tasha's gaze didn't soften. You think that's new information? No, he admitted, but I thought if you heard me say it. I don't need to hear you say it, she cut in. You hurt me. You humiliated me. But the worst part isn't that you did, it's that I let myself think I needed your apology to move forward. I don't. Fred looked away. Then why come? To prove that, she said. To myself. They stood in silence. The air between them was heavy, but not electric, just full of endings. He pulled a photograph from his jacket, a picture of the 3 children at her art exhibit laughing beside Winston. "He look happy?" he said softly. "They are." He nodded, folding the photo carefully. "Then I'll go." "Fred," she said, stopping him. He turned, hope flickering like a reflex. "Don't ever confuse forgiveness with permission," she said evenly. "I forgive you, but not so you can sleep better. I forgive you because I'm done carrying the weight." He swallowed hard, nodded once, and walked away. His steps echoed across the pier until the sound disappeared into the wind. Tasha stayed, watching the horizon blur. It didn't feel like relief. It felt like balance, like something in the universe had quietly corrected itself. 2 days later, she stood at the front of a crowded hall for the Community Resilience Gala, hosted by the mayor's office. Loretta had nominated her months ago without saying a word. The applause hit her like a wave as her name was called. Winston stood at the side of the stage, arms crossed, a small proud smile beneath his mustache. When she reached the podium, she paused, gripping the edges. "I used to think strength meant never breaking, but I've learned that real strength is what you build from the pieces." She scanned the crowd, parents, soldiers, children from the studio waving tiny paint-stained hands. "I lost years to shame, but sometimes life shatters you so completely that the only thing left to do is rebuild. And if you're lucky, the version you create after is the one you were meant to be all along." The hall was silent. Then came the standing ovation. Later, outside the venue, Winston found her alone under the awning. "Didn't think I'd cry at a city gala," he said. "Didn't think I'd make it to one," she replied with a grin. He leaned against the railing. "You're sure you're okay after the pier?" "I'm not sure I'm supposed to be okay," she said thoughtfully, "but I'm steady." "That's better." Winston nodded. "Then that's enough." From across the street, Loretta waved her clipboard like a sword. "Come on, heroes. The kids are waiting at the studio. They want pizza and apparently a speech." Tasha laughed, an easy, full sound that carried in the air. "God help me if they made another banner." "They did," Winston said. "It says, 'Mom's a legend. Glitter everywhere.'" "Of course it does." That night, as she returned to the studio, the walls were alive with laughter. The kids ran up to her, each carrying a handmade medal, construction paper and yarn. "Best mom ever! Bravest woman! Queen of paint!" She knelt, hugging them all at once, overwhelmed. In that blur of arms and laughter and love, she realized something simple. The universe had taken what was meant to destroy her and handed her a life instead. No dramatic second chance, no love story rewritten. Just truth, earned and lived. Sometimes closure isn't about what you gain, it's about what you finally let go.
The seasons changed quietly that year. Summer folded into autumn, and Burlington's air took on that faint scent of wet leaves and distant bonfires. The chaos that once surrounded Tashia Gamble's name, the whispers, the scandal, the viral headlines, had dissolved into the background hum of ordinary life. Ordinary. Something she hadn't known in years. Now, mornings began with sunlight spilling through the blinds, 3 sets of feet padding toward her bed, and Mallory whispering, "Mom, you're going to be late for work again." She wasn't late. She just liked pretending to be. Her clinic, small, bright, and named Three Oaks Pediatrics, sat on Maple Street, tucked between a bookstore and a cafe. Winston had helped her secure the space. Loretta had helped design it. The Triplets had chosen the name. It wasn't just a workplace, it was a piece of proof. A place that said you did it, even when they said you couldn't. Each morning she walked into the soft chorus of greetings from patients and parents, the smell of disinfectant and coffee mingling. She'd hang her coat, adjust the framed photo of Kara, Jonas, and Mallory on her desk, and take a breath that didn't ache anymore. That afternoon, Winston stopped by unannounced, carrying a box of cupcakes from Loretta's bakery. "You always bring food when you're about to say something annoying," she teased. He grinned. "I'm not wrong, but this time it's actually good news." He set the box down, leaned against the counter, and pulled out his phone. "You remember that veteran mentorship program I told you about? They're launching a family support branch. They want someone to lead the medical and child development side. Someone like you." Tashia froze mid-motion. "Winston." He raised a hand. "No pressure. Just think about it. You've already done the hard part. Maybe it's time you stepped back into something bigger." She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes fell to the photo on her desk again. 6 years ago, she had stood in a borrowed dress, holding her babies in a rented apartment, wondering how to pay rent. And now she was being asked to lead something built on the ashes of her old world. "Maybe," she said softly. Her voice didn't tremble. That evening she drove to the edge of town with the kids. There was a park overlooking Lake Champlain, its waters glimmering gold beneath the sunset. Families laughed in the distance, dogs chased frisbees, and music floated from someone's speaker. Kara and Mallory were racing down the grass, their hair flying. Jonas was bent over the sand, building a fort out of driftwood. Tashia watched them, the light catching in her eyes. For the first time, she wasn't looking back. She wasn't haunted by what-ifs or half-finished conversations. "Mom," Jonas called, "can we invite Winston next time?" "We'll see, bud." He grinned, satisfied. She sank into the grass, folding her knees beneath her, her mind wandering to everything that had happened, the humiliation, the whispers, the sharp cruelty of being unseen, and then the slow, patient miracle of being seen again. She had spent years thinking her strength would come from confrontation, from proving everyone wrong, but it hadn't. It had come from getting up every morning and loving those kids like the world wasn't watching, from building a life without waiting for an apology, from being her own ending. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, she sat by her window with a mug of tea and the soft hum of crickets outside. Burlington had quieted, but her thoughts hadn't. Her phone buzzed. A message from Loretta. "We're doing a feature on women who rebuilt. They want to interview you. I said yes. Hope you don't mind." Tashia smiled. A few years ago, that kind of spotlight would have terrified her. Now it felt like a mirror held up to a healed wound, something she could finally look at without flinching. She typed back, "Thank you. Let's do it." She looked out the window. Across the lake, the faint shimmer of lights from the harbor danced on the water. Somewhere out there, Fred Norsgard still existed. But he no longer defined her story. He was just a man in another life, a man who'd taught her what silence can cost and what truth can save. And somewhere deep in her heart, beneath the layers of pain and peace, she whispered, not forgiveness, not bitterness, but just finality. "Goodbye, Fred." The clock ticked softly. The tea went cold. In the reflection of the window, her face looked softer, older, freer, the kind of face that belongs to someone who's seen storms and built gardens from their wreckage. If you were Tashia, would you have gone to that wedding? Would you have faced the man who broke you, or would you have let silence be your justice? Tell me in the comments, because every person's version of closure looks different. And as she finally stood, turning off the light, the only sound that filled the apartment was the quiet rhythm of her children breathing in the next room. 3 little heartbeats that had rewritten her fate. For the first time in years, she slept without armor. 7 years later, the morning sun spilled across the main street of Burlington, glinting off bakery windows and the bronze plaque beside a clinic door that read, Three Oaks Foundation, Family Health and Veterans Support Center. Inside, the walls were painted the same soft green Tashia loved, peaceful, human, and humble. Her photo hung near the entrance, surrounded by letters from families she'd helped and drawings from children she'd treated. The foundation had grown far beyond a clinic now. It was a community, a living testament that survival could become service. She wasn't there anymore, not because she'd left, but because she'd finally allowed herself to rest. The morning's bustle was led by a tall young woman with brown curls pulled into a ponytail. Kara, now 20, wearing a white coat with resident physician stitched beneath her name. She greeted staff with quiet confidence, her mother's calm in her voice. In one of the offices, Jonas adjusted camera equipment, his documentary crew setting up for an interview about the foundation's origins. Across the hall, May, who had inherited Loretta's laugh and her mother's eyes, was managing patient files and training volunteers. It was Founders' Day, an annual event the community held in honor of the woman who had turned her pain into purpose. Winston Moreno, gray at the temples now, slower in movement but steady as ever, arrived with a bouquet of tulips. He greeted the triplets with a grin. "Your mom would have been proud of this," he said softly. Kara smiled. "She would have said we're working too hard." "Yeah," Jonas added, smirking, "then she'd do twice as much herself." They laughed, an easy, familiar sound that filled the hallway. The ceremony began just after noon in the park overlooking Lake Champlain, the same lake where Tashia used to take them on weekends, the same spot where she once whispered, "We're okay now." A small crowd had gathered, families, veterans, doctors, volunteers. Loretta sat near the front, older now but still radiant, her eyes glassy with pride. And at the podium stood Kara, holding a sheet of notes she'd rewritten at least 20 times. "My mother," she began, her voice clear, "wasn't someone who wanted attention. She never thought her story was remarkable. She just thought surviving was what people did." She paused, glancing at the horizon where the lake met the sky. But what she didn't realize was that surviving quietly is an act of rebellion. It's saying, "I won't let what you did define who I become." When she walked into that wedding years ago, she wasn't there to ruin someone's day. She was there to reclaim her own. And when she walked out, she didn't look back. A soft murmur ran through the crowd. Winston nodded, eyes lowered. "She taught us," Kara continued, "that justice doesn't always look like payback. Sometimes it looks like peace. Sometimes it looks like building something no one thought you could. And that's what this place is. Our family's proof that healing is louder than hate." Applause rose gently, but no one shouted. It was the kind of respect that felt like silence, a silence filled with meaning. After the speeches, Jonas stayed behind to film B-roll by the water. May walked along the path, touching the plaque engraved with her mother's name. "Do you think she knew how far we'd come?" May whispered. Kara joined her, slipping her hand into her sister's. "She always knew. That's why she fought so hard." May smiled through tears. "It still feels like she's here." "She is," Kara said. "Everywhere." A few yards away, Winston stood with Loretta, watching the siblings laugh, the camera flashing in the autumn light. "She changed everything," Loretta said softly. Winston nodded. "Funny thing is, she didn't set out to. She just refused to disappear." They watched as Kara hugged a young veteran's wife, offering her a clinic brochure. Jonas showed an older man the interview setup. May helped a little girl pick wildflowers near the bench. "Look at them," Loretta whispered. "They're her legacy." Winston exhaled slowly, a wistful smile forming. "And they don't even know they're still writing her story." Later, as the sun dipped low, the park emptied.
The triplets lingered near the water, the wind tugging gently at their jackets. Kara set down a small wooden box, a time capsule they'd made years ago. Inside were mementos, a photograph of their old apartment, a drawing May had done of the four of them, one of Tashia's silver bracelets, and a single page from her journal. Jonas unfolded it carefully and read aloud, voice thick with emotion. "If they ever ask who I was, tell them I didn't break. Tell them I built. Tell them love isn't what you lose, it's what you keep alive." None of them spoke for a long time after that. The lake shimmered, gold and quiet. If you had to define your legacy, not in wealth or fame, but in what you leave behind in others, what would it be? Would your strength be loud, or would it live quietly like Tashia's? Tell me in the comments below. As evening fell, the last light caught on the bronze letters of her name, and the breeze carried laughter across the lake. And though the world moved on, her story remained, woven into the hands she healed, the lives she touched, and the children who carried her fire forward. Tashia Gamble had not been forgotten. She had become something better.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you loved this story, you will definitely love the next one. It's more intriguing than you can ever imagine. So go ahead and watch it now. Click on the image on your screen right away to watch the next one. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. It helps and encourages us to share the best human interest stories you'd love.